Right. Within this next section, what I want to do, I want to explore second temple Jewish perspectives on the Messiah. Now, when we're thinking about the Messiah, again, we have to be mindful. In the ancient world during the time of Jesus, there wasn't like a monolithic view of Judaism. Yes, they were all united by the common belief that they were the chosen people of God, that they had a special covenant with God around the Torah, also around their way of religious worship centered in the Jerusalem temple, but there were various perspectives on like how that type of Judaism ought to emerge and be lived out and practiced in the daily life. As we can notice in the Gospels, you had the Sadducees and the Pharisees, but there were other also groups out there that are not mentioned in the Gospels. That includes the Qumran community, which are also known as the Essenes. And so there were different groups. Oh, and then I also forgot to mention the Zealots. But there were different groups of Jewish factions or different schools of thought within Judaism. As a result, we know that not all Jewish people had like a single common definition of what a Messiah was. And there were also different texts out there that also promoted different views of the identity of a Messiah. And again, when we're thinking about the time of Jesus, there was no such thing as the Old Testament the way we understand that today. That was not developed into the end of the first century after the fall of Judaism in the old during the time of Jesus in the New Testament, what you actually see is actually them always referencing the law of Moses, which is usually in reference to Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, or you will see them referencing the prophets. And so those were like the two kind of common canonical groups that they were referred to. But there was no such thing as we understand today as the Old Testament. So as a result, there were different books that were like in circulation that were used or championed, prioritized by different religious Jewish religious groups. All that to say, what I'm going to share within the following are some texts outside of the Old Testament, but they were texts that were also part of the theological imagination of the Jewish people during the time of Jesus. When we're looking at this, overall, this notion of a messianic king, it develops in Jewish literature. Again, we saw this in First Samuel, Second Samuel. We saw this in Isaiah. We start to see this in Psalms. But also we start to see other texts as well that continue on with this motif or this notion of a messianic king. Going to this text here, this is in Psalm of Solomon 17:4. He says, "O Lord, did you choose David to be king over Israel and swore to him touching the sea that never should his kingdom fail before you?" Or here's another passage within that same chapter. "Lord, and raise up for him their king, the son of David, to rule over Israel, your servant, in the time which you choose, O God. Undergird him with the strength to destroy the unrighteous rulers, to cleanse Jerusalem from Gentiles who trample her to destruction." Again, notice in these two texts, notice how they view this Davidic king, this Messiah-like figure. Not only is he going to rule, but he's also going to destroy the Gentiles. And we can also see here in the Psalm of Solomon 17:25, where you see again, continues with the same motif that the Gentiles, the enemies of Israel, the enemies of Judah, are going to be destroyed. They're going to be destroyed by this messianic king. Now, these texts themselves, they were written during a time when the Roman general Pompey had brought Judea under Roman authority. This is around 63 BC. The Jewish writer of this text, the Song of Solomon, kind of hopes for a king who's going to not only like push back against Roman aggression and imperial expansion, but it's also going to renew and restore David's kingdom. So there's this also another thing too, this anticipation that this Davidic king is going to be free from sin, will have political authority, and will have this endowed power to remove all Gentile impurities from the Holy Land, from Jerusalem. Now, there was another group as well. This was a group called the Qumran community. They were also known as the Essenes. They lived in the desert. They believed overall that the worship of God in the Jewish temple in Jerusalem was politically corrupt. So they thought that like that whole apparatus of the temple with the Sadducees and the priests and the everything that's going on in the city, that everything there is just corrupt because as we know, the Sadducees were kind of like in collusion with the Roman authorities. And so there was this like kind of more of your very ultra conservative group within the Judaism, these Essenes that they were like, we're just gonna go to the desert and we're going to create an alternative community and we're going to create an alternative way of worshiping God with our own rules and everything. And so you see these Essenes that live in the region of Qumran, and they themselves had a different idea, or at least a different notion of this Messiah. And when we look at their text, they do believe, though, that this Messiah is going to come from the lineage of King David. So they did believe in this Davidic king who's going to come and restore the people of God and restore and cleanse the temple and bring all these, all these evildoers to justice. But we also could notice something else that the Qumran community did believe that this Messiah figure was going to get executed, or at least he would die. So he wasn't going to just like live forever, but they will come against him. So he will have some opposition against him. The Qumran community also believed in a priestly Messiah. So there were two Messiahs for the Qumran community. There was a Messiah of Aaron and the Messiah of Israel. So they believed not only in a Davidic Messiah, but they also believed in a priestly Messiah, that there was going to emerge these two Messiahs, one from the lineage of Judah, another from the lineage of Aaron. And so we can see multiple texts within this Jewish community called the Essenes. And in their texts, these Qumran scrolls, also known as the rules of the community, they believed that there was this two messiahs, this other messiah from the lineage of Aaron. And so they had this notion that there was going to be a priestly messiah and a kingly messiah. There's also this other text called the Testament of the 12 Patriarchs. They too developed this concept of the Messiah. And they believe too that this Messiah is going to be an eternal king, that this Messiah is going to is going to be raised by the Lord to be a new priest. Um, this Messiah was going to be from the lineage of Levi. And so there's this priestly Messiah, this kingly Messiah. This Messiah is going to reveal the knowledge of God. It's going to help the people understand how to interpret the Torah, and it's also going to rule forever. There's another book as well called the Book of Enoch. And this is an apocalyptic book. And in this book, you have a different notion of a Messiah, that there is this Son of Man. And you see this chosen Son of Man described throughout the entire book of Enoch. And this Son of Man is a messianic figure. It's God's chosen one. And this Son of Man, who is also the Messiah, he is basically that eschatological figure, that end times figure who's going to judge and rule the world. And to make it even more complicated, there's another apocalyptic book by the name of Fourth Ezra. And they too believe that there was going to be a Messiah that was going to come at the end of the age. But this Messiah was going to reign for 400 years. This Messiah was God's son, um, but this Messiah was going to die as well so that all people would have life. This Messiah was also going to inaugurate this period in which there was going to be a resurrection of the dead and also the renewal of humanity. And so notice here within 4th Ezra, chapter 7, verses 28 through 32, you can see this messianic idea that starts to emerge, this messianic view of God's son, who's going to reign for a prolonged period of time, who's going to die, but whose death is going to bring about the resurrection. Now, that is pretty interesting. Um, now, I do want to point out, though, that this book, 4th Ezra, more than likely was written after the life and death of Jesus. So fourth Ezra may in fact reflect Jewish views that were influenced by early Christian views. And so just like the way we have like the rabbinic literature, the Mishnah, and the Talmud, those are books, Jewish books that were developed 400, 600 years later, and they too are in like dialogue with early Christianity or early Christian texts. But what does this all suggest? The early Christian movement emerged during a time in which there was no Jewish consensus on the messianic figure. So this leads us to ask the question, why did the early Christians designate Jesus as the Messiah when the role he filled was so different from current Jewish expectations? And we could also notice that there are some Jewish expectations that Jesus kind of seems to fulfill, and others that he hasn't. For example, when we look at fourth Ezra, we could see that the Messiah is going to have a 400-year reign and will die and resurrect. In first Enoch, the Messiah is also the Son of Man who will rule on earth. In the Testament of the Patriarchs, the Messiah will be eternal and from the tribe of Levi. From the Qumran scrolls, there's going to be two Messiahs, one priestly and one kingly. And in the Psalm of Solomon, the Messiah will politically vanquish Rome and destroy all of Israel's enemies. So it leads us to the question, how do you know that Jesus is the Messiah?